Right, let's get to it. Let's get comfy. Why do I sing when I'm doing jobs? Hello and welcome. So many are familiar with Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre and of course Shirley, plus the others. And some may even know about her unfinished novel Emma. But let me get this straight, this isn't to be confused with Jane Austen's Emma. This is a completely different Emma. But there's another lesser known work that Charlotte began before her death called The Story of Willie Ellin. And while we don't know much about it, the fragments that remain offers us an intriguing glimpse into Charlotte's evolving writing style and the significant change that was happening in her life at the time. In this video, we're going to explore when Charlotte began writing Willie Ellin and why it was left unfinished, and how the personal changes she was experiencing, including, of course, her marriage to Arthur Bell Nicholls, and the challenges she faced, might have shaped the work. So let's take a closer look at this lesser-known chapter of Charlotte Bronte's literary legacy and what it tells us about her as a writer during this transformative period in her life. So grab yourself a pot of tea, settle down, and let's dive in and explore this fascinating part of Charlotte Bronte's journey. Charlotte began writing the story of Willie Ellin, and we're just going to call it Willie Ellin from now on because it's too much of a mouthful. And also beware, I can tell already I'm going to get tongue-tied with that name after a while. But anyway, as I was saying, she began the story around about 1853 after the death of her siblings, leaving her, of course, the only surviving child. By this time, Charlotte had already finished Villette, but the following years were emotionally difficult and she was struggling both personally and creatively. To understand this unfinished novel, we need to look at what was happening in Charlotte's personal life. A great deal was going on at the time, and I think exploring these events might help us answer some of the questions we have about this novel, Willie Ellin. So in April 1853, Arthur Bell Nicholls, who was Patrick's assistant for several years, proposed to Charlotte. Their relationship had never been close in the romantic sense. Yeah, okay, Arthur would come to the parsonage for tea occasionally, and of course he worked with Patrick and they would sometimes have discussions, but Charlotte did not see him as a husband. And while they had intellectual rapport, Charlotte didn't feel any romantic attraction to him. It seems that Arthur's feelings for Charlotte were deeper than hers were for him, and she didn't expect their professional and somewhat cordial relationship to lead to a proposal, which of course is what happened. Charlotte's decision to reject Arthur's proposal was largely influenced by her own feelings, but also by the reaction of those around her, once, of course, they learnt of it. Charlotte's close friend, Ellen Nussey, upon hearing of the proposal, made it clear that she did not approve of the match. In a letter to Charlotte, Ellen wrote, "I am so sorry to hear of Arthur's proposal. I do not think he's the right man for you. I fear he will not make you happy." God, that was a brave friend to say that. While Ellen's disapproval came after Charlotte had already rejected the proposal, it was clear that she did not believe Arthur was suitable for Charlotte. Also, Martha Brown, the Bronte family servant, also expressed concerns about the match. And though Martha's opinion were more subtle, it's likely that she too recognised that Charlotte and Arthur were not well suited. However, the most significant influence on Charlotte's decision came from her father, Patrick Bronte. Charlotte discussed the proposal with him before giving Arthur her answer, and his reaction was one of intense anger. Patrick strongly disapproved of Arthur, or at least as a husband, and his outburst was enough to further convince Charlotte that she was making the right decision to refuse him. Eventually, Arthur, heartbroken and embarrassed, decided to leave Haworth. Yet while he remained in the village, Charlotte found it increasingly difficult to face him. In a letter to Ellen Nussey around this time, Charlotte expressed her annoyance, saying, "I wish he would just go away. I cannot think of him with patience any longer. He must go at once." These words to me reveal Charlotte's frustration not out of heartbreak, but from a sense of relief. She'd never considered Arthur as a husband, and his proposal left her feeling uncomfortable and conflicted, and probably a little bit embarrassed. At this time, Charlotte was also struggling to start a new novel. After publication of Villette earlier that year, she found it difficult to follow up with another work. Willie Ellin was no exception, and Charlotte's writing process was far from smooth. Her creative struggles during this period were compounded by the emotional strain of course, losing her siblings, rejecting Arthur's proposal, and feeling the weight of her father's expectations. Yet, despite these challenges, Willie Ellin began to take some shape, but very slowly. The novel, which centred around a young boy, addressing themes of social class, sacrifice, and the complexities of growing up, and these were all issues that resonated with Charlotte's own life. It seems likely that these themes reflected Charlotte's internal struggles with loss, confusion, and her quest for stability in a world that had become increasingly difficult to navigate. So you might wonder what I have in my hand. This is a hat pin. I don't know if you can see it. And I've picked it up because I have a habit of waving my arms around a lot when I'm talking, which is fine. But yeah, I'm going to try and calm it down, because when I'm editing, I see that I stand here doing this. And da, 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 da. So I thought maybe if I had something to fiddle with, I wouldn't have such helicopter hands. So we will see. Anyway, the story of Willie Ellin exists in 5 fragmented parts, totaling 18 pages, which are often confusing to piece together. Even when these sections are compiled, it's still unclear how they fit together or whether they're intended to form a cohesive narrative. These fragments don't follow in a clear sequence, and it's difficult to determine whether they were meant to be part of, say, a finished novel, or if they were simply ideas Charlotte were exploring during her writing process. The first fragment introduces the unnamed narrator, a member of the Ellin family, who returns to his ancestral home and reflects on the past. He mentions an old housekeeper named Mrs. Widdop, which I think is a great name, who was doted on him as a child. The Ellin family have lived in Ellin Hall for generations, but the narrator's older half-brother sold the estate, and after his death, without a will or an heir, the narrator inherits his brother's fortune and buys back Ellin Hall. I hope that made sense. The narrator reflects on his half-brother's nature, calling him a strong man in body and a tyrant at heart. The second fragment takes the narrator back to Ellin Balcony, a place that seems to hold this deep personal significance. However, the narrator is kind of vague about his exact relationship to the house, and he doesn't clarify whether he is an owner or a family member, a tenant or a servant. Instead, he mysteriously states, "I was there and it was my home." The narrator, which I can't say, the narrator briefly muses on the history of those who've lived there before him and mentions another housekeeper, though this one remains unnamed, as well as a dog chained up in a yard. I mean, you can't have a Bronte book without a dog in it, now can you? The third part of the story offers more narrative clarity. It begins with Mrs. Hill, the housekeeper at Ellin Balcony, sitting alone in the kitchen one quiet night when she's disturbed by a knock at the door. To her shock, she finds a young child and a man standing outside. Mrs. Hill recognises him as Ellin of Goldpit, and the child replies, "I'm Willie, that is Willie Ellin, and I came this very day from Goldpit, 15 miles, a long way. I'm tired." The child reveals that he has run away from home after being mistreated by his older stepbrother, Edward Ellin. Willie is seeking refuge for a few days and unsure what to do next. And he explains that Edward is cruel to him and that he is threatened with the future of poverty, forced into a trade, or worse, a life of servitude. Mrs. Hill is sympathetic, but reminds him that without money he has no real choice but to learn a trade. Willie, clearly unhappy with this idea, comments that there was no traders in the family until Edward, who only pursued it out of greed. The next morning, Edward arrives at Ellin Balcony, searching for Willie. Mrs. Hill tries to intervene, but Edward finds Willie and threatens to whip him. However, a business associate of Edward's, Mr. Bosas, I'll put the name up here and you can tell me what you think it is, steps in and convinces Edward to back down. Boas is described as a capable protector, someone whose power would never be used cruelly. After this intervention, Edward laughs off the situation, claiming his threats were in jest, and Willie is forced to return home with him. Once back at Goldpit, Willie's life returns to a grim reality as he is beaten by Edward in a way that hints at the darker, more brutal side of his stepbrother. The fourth part immediately follows this scene, with Willie trying to reason with Edward to stop the violence. He pleads with his brother, suggesting that if he was brought before a magistrate, Edward could face a fine or even transportation. Edward, however, sees this as a threat and retaliates by thrashing Willie senseless. In the aftermath, Willie manages to undress, crawl into bed and pray in despair. In the fifth and final fragment, we meet a character named William, who may or may not be the same Willie from earlier in the story. After being flogged by Edward, William is alone and in pain when a sympathetic girl of 17 approaches him. She's heard the sound of Edward's attack from her own bedroom and vows that Willie will not be harmed again by his brother. Whether or not this promise can be kept remains unclear, leaving the reader to wonder what the future holds for Willie. Or William. Yay! I am now off the floor and I am into a chair in my corner, and I still have Marjorie here. And I don't know if you've seen before, but oh no, this side. A lot of you mentioned that I should put my daughter's picture in a frame, which I've done and I've popped up here. So yeah. It was a good idea, and she's so touched by it. She was absolutely blown away by all your lovely comments. But yeah, so I now have a few of my pictures on the wall, which is something I've been meaning to do for a very, very long time. But I haven't quite finished the room yet, so I'm not going to show you anywhere else other than this corner. But yeah, I've got my comfy chair. It's good. It's somewhere to sit and read and watch the world go by. Following Arthur's departure from Haworth in 1853, and after Charlotte had initially turned down his proposal, Charlotte's emotional landscape was complex. Though she had deep respect and affection for Arthur, she was not ready to accept his proposal at that time. Arthur's departure marked a period of reflection for Charlotte, during which she grappled with her emotions following the death of her sisters and, of course, her brother. After some months of absence, Charlotte and Arthur began writing to each other. Their correspondence began somewhat formally at first, but as Charlotte's grief subsided and she found herself more able to look forward, the tone of the letters began to shift. Arthur's patient, kind and steadfast nature stood in contrast to the chaos and the sorrow that Charlotte had endured. Through these letters, Charlotte came to appreciate his loyalty and his devotion, and over time she began to see him not only as a companion, but as someone that she could actually love. The letters played a significant role in their evolving relationship. Arthur's letters were respectful and caring, providing Charlotte with a steady support system. And as Charlotte's feelings grew for him, the correspondence deepened, leading to her eventual acceptance of his proposal in 1854. By the time they married in June of 1854, their bond was grounded in both emotional healing and mutual respect, with the letters marking the journey from hesitant affection to full commitment. However, despite Charlotte's change of heart, her father, Patrick Bronte, still did not approve of their marriage. And though he had reluctantly given his consent, he refused to attend the wedding at the last minute, leaving Charlotte to walk down the aisle without him, which I think was awful. Charlotte's letters following the wedding revealed the deep affection and happiness she found in her marriage. And writing to Ellen Nussey on Boxing Day on 1854, she shared, "Arthur joins me in sincere good wishes for a happy Christmas and many of them to you and yours. He is well, thank God, and so am I, and he is my dear boy certainly, dearer now than he was 6 months ago, and in 3 days we shall have actually been married that length of time." Charlotte's warm words reflect how much she cherished her new life with Arthur, embracing the role of wife with contentment. However, despite the joy of marriage, Charlotte's writing took a backseat during this period. Her thoughts on writing were still present, but it became clear that her creative energy was now distracted elsewhere. Arthur himself remarked on this in a letter to George Smith, recalling a quieter evening in front of the fire during the winter of 1854. He shared, "One evening at the close of 1854, as we sat by the fire listening to the howling of the wind around the house, my poor wife suddenly said, 'If you've not been with me, I must have been writing now.' She ran upstairs, brought down and read aloud the beginnings of a new tale. When she had finished, I remarked, 'The critics will accuse you of repetition as you've again introduced a school.' She replied, 'Oh, I shall alter that. I always begin 2 or 3 times before I can please myself.' But it was not to be." This new tale was a reworking of Willie Ellin, which Charlotte had originally begun in the spring of 1853. However, what Arthur describes suggests that by late in 1854 she was introducing a new protagonist, Matilda Fitzgibbon, a young girl whose aristocratic connections gained her favour at school despite her unappealing looks and melancholy disposition. Matilda is eventually revealed as an imposter, but she finds an unexpected protector in William Ellin. Curiously, no surviving Willie Ellin manuscripts mention this Matilda Fitzgibbon, raising the question of whether Charlotte's abandoned this idea or whether the sections that Arthur recalls have been lost. However, the name Matilda Fitzgibbon does appear in Emma, Charlotte's final unfinished work. In Emma, Matilda is a seemingly wealthy heiress at a struggling school, but when attempts to contact her father failed, her background is thrown into question. The novel also includes a Mr. Ellin, suggesting that Charlotte may have carried elements of Willie Ellin into Emma rather than continuing Willie Ellin as a separate work. Despite Charlotte's hopes to develop her new fragments into a full narrative, her life circumstances and the demands of her marriage took precedence. By January 1855, she and Arthur were invited to Gawthorpe Hall, and it was here that Charlotte's health took an unexpected turn. She'd caught a cold during a damp walk on the moors, but this minor illness was soon overshadowed by a far more significant change. Charlotte was pregnant. In a letter to Ellen, Charlotte hinted at her pregnancy when she described the indigestion and continual faint sickness she was experiencing, stating, "Don't conjecture, dear Nell, for it's too soon yet, though I have certainly never felt as I have done lately." This was the beginning of a pregnancy that would soon complicate her health further. Charlotte's pregnancy marked a turning point in her writing life. With the arrival of a new chapter in her personal life, her creative output diminished significantly, and as her health declined, it became more difficult for Charlotte to focus on her writing. Nevertheless, she continued to occasionally return to her earlier work, even if only to read fragments aloud to Arthur. Writing for Charlotte was no longer a consistent pursuit, but rather something she could only return to in moments of quiet reflection, often with Arthur by her side. After her marriage, the focus of Charlotte's life shifted, and her relationship with Arthur, her new health concerns, and the change in the domestic environment influenced the pace of her writing. Although she remained fond of her literary work, Charlotte's creative life during this period was ultimately be marked by a much more limited output than in her earlier years. Where is my microphone gone? Maybe I need to clip that on there as well, so it looks less like it's... Come on, microphone. Oh, technology can be so difficult sometimes. Just trying to clip my microphone on. Get in there. Right, you there? Oh, cross-eyed now, can't see. Charlotte Bronte's unfinished novel, Willie Ellin, is an intriguing and complex work. These 5 parts provide valuable insight into Charlotte's creative process and themes. The fragments are somewhat confusing as it's unclear whether they are meant to follow one another or whether they're intended as separate works or revision of earlier ideas. However, these pieces offer a glimpse into Charlotte's evolving writing style and the elements that she explored in her fiction. The story begins, as we've said, with the return of an unnamed member of the Ellin family to his ancestral home, Ellin Hall. The narrator reflects on the past, particularly on the old housekeeper, Mrs. Widdop, who has doted on him since childhood. This opening segment introduces the theme of inheritance and legacy, and with the narrator revealed that Ellin Halls passed out of the Ellin family's possession when his half-brother sold it. Following his brother's death, the narrator inherits his fortune and uses it to repurchase the family home. The fragments end with a sense of bitterness as the narrator recalls how his older brother was a tyrant, both physically stronger and more domineering in nature. The second part of the story delves deeper into the narrator's relationship with the house, but it becomes rather elusive. The narrator speaks of a specific place within the house, Ellin balcony, yet refuses to clarify whether he owns the house as a member of the family or simply just a tenant. This ambiguity leaves the reader with a sense of confusion about the narrator's true identity and the position within the family dynamics. The narrator reflects on his first encounter with the house and the history of those who've lived there before him, bringing the house itself to life as a character that holds memories and stories within its walls. In the third part, the narrative takes a clearer shape. It introduces Mrs. Hill, the housekeeper of Ellin balcony, who is disturbed by an unexpected knock at the door one quiet night. As I've said, she opens the door to find the young child, Willie, whom she recognises as an Ellin of Goldpit, Willie, who reveals his name as William Ellin, and who has run away from home to escape the cruelty of that older stepbrother, Edward Ellin. Willie describes how Edward has threatened him with poverty and forced him into a life of servitude, dismissing his chances of ever becoming a gentleman. Mrs. Hill, though sympathetic, advises Willie to seek employment, but he's reluctant as he does not want to give up that dream of a different future. The tension escalates when Edward tracks Willie down and threatens him with physical punishment. A business associate of Edward's, Mr. Boas, intervenes, and though Edward backs down, it becomes clear that Willie's fate is still in Edward's hands. The emotional weight of Willie's suffering is highlighted as he returns to Goldpit, where he is subject to further cruelty from his brother. In these scenes, Charlotte Brontë illustrates the harshness of family bonds, especially when power dynamics are at play. There's echoes of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights and the way Charlotte uses the house and the relationship within it as a reflection of the character's inner turmoil and torment. The fourth part of the story continues Willie's suffering as he faces further abuse from his brother. Willie's desperate attempts to reason with Edward and prevent further harm highlights his helplessness and that despair that he feels. It's in this part that we see Charlotte's focus on the physical and emotional abuse of children, a reoccurring theme in her juvenile work, which she later explores in her more famous works. Finally, in the fifth part, the story takes a turn as a sympathetic girl approaches Willie after he's been beaten. She pleads to protect him from further harm and vows that Edward will not hurt him again. And this moment of tenderness offers a brief glimpse of hope in a story marked by cruelty and hardship. I think I need some tea. Do you want a tea update? Let me give you a tea update. So, sorry, it was a bit noisy. Here is my tea update. This is an Easter mug as it's around the Easter time. I don't think you can get these so much now, but do you remember when you used to get an Easter egg inside a mug, or it'd sit on the top, wouldn't it? And they used to all have Eastery patterns and things on. And this is probably one of the final ones they ever made, because I haven't really seen them since. And it is a Cadbury's Easter egg mug. So, but yeah, I did have it up here, but I was thinking how stupid this brightly coloured mug looked amongst all my pretty. So yeah, I didn't leave it there, but there is never a time when there isn't a mug nearby of some sort. So what are we all drinking now? Now the weather's getting a little bit warmer, are we still sticking with tea? Or are we inclined to go along the herbal teas? Do we lay off tea in the hot weather? So let me know. I mean, I've been told so much about your tea habits in the comments. It's absolutely brilliant. And it seems that abroad they sell Yorkshire Gold, whereas here we just have what is classed as Yorkshire tea or Yorkshire Gold, which is a bit stronger. So I'm assuming it's just the name that they use and it's just normal standard Yorkshire tea, but in other countries. Don't know where that came from. The Fragments of Willie Ellin gives us a fascinating insight into Charlotte Bronte's ability to grapple with complex themes like power, cruelty, and that struggle within families. Even though the story remains unfinished, these snippets reveal a lot about how Charlotte was evolving as a writer, especially her knack for creating complicated characters and delving into that emotional and psychological challenges that they face. The fact that we only have pieces of this story only adds to its mystery, and of course you want to know what might have been. At the heart of Willie Ellin is Charlotte's exploration of power and cruelty. The characters of Edwin Ellin stands as a representation of the devastating effect of unchecked authority within families. The way he mistreats his younger brother, Willie, lays bare the cruelty that can fester when power dynamics are skewed. Charlotte's portrayal of Willie's suffering shows how vulnerable people can be when they're at the mercy of those in positions of power, and the emotional weight of that abuse. It's not just about the physical power, it's about how Edward manipulates Willie's perception of himself, making him feel small, worthless and helpless. But there's also a glimmer of hope woven into the narrative, even in its unfinished state. The brief interaction between Willie and that unnamed girl who tries to comfort him after his beating brings a sense of tenderness that's desperately needed in a world so full of cruelty. It's these moments of human kindness that Charlotte often brings into her work, showing that even in the darkest of times, a simple act of compassion can have a profound impact. This is one of the things I think Charlotte does best. She doesn't just sort of show the ugliness of human nature, but also the possibility for change, the potential for redemption. Even though Willie Ellin is unfinished, its fragments naturally leave us with so many questions. I mean, what would have happened to Willie? Would he have found a way out of the suffering, or would he have been trapped forever in this cycle of abuse? What about Edward? Could his cruelty have been confronted and changed, or would he have continued down the same destructive path? These questions remain unanswered, of course, but they give us a glimpse into the direction Charlotte might have taken the story, and of course the themes she was working through at the time. What's fascinating about these fragments is that they give us a look into Charlotte's writing process. Willie Ellin shows that she wasn't just interested in telling a story, but in experimenting with different ways to express complex emotions and ideas. The unfinished nature of the work shows a writer still refining her craft, pushing herself to explore new narrative possibilities and deepening her characters. Charlotte was constantly revising, testing out new ideas and working to make her storytelling even more impactful. Ultimately, Willie Ellin gives us a picture of Charlotte Brontë as a writer who wasn't just focusing on a finished novel, but was deeply committed to exploring the complexities of human nature. Through these fragments, we see a writer who was willing to challenge herself with difficult themes, showing us the full range of emotions from cruelty to kindness, suffering to redemption. Even though we'll never know how the story ends, the fragments leave us with a sense of Charlotte's ambition and creative vision, offering us a glimpse into a writer still growing and searching for new ways to tell the story that matters to her. Do you know, I don't think this is helping me to stop me from waving my hands, because I found myself using it. It's almost like, you know, a baton, like an orchestra. I don't know. I feel like I'm just waving this around as well as my hands. So yeah, that will teach me. So the question of why Charlotte Brontë never completed Willie Ellin is a complex one with several contributing factors. One key reason is the dramatic shift in Charlotte's personal life. In 1854, as I said, she married Arthur Bell Nicholls, which brought her a sense of emotional fulfilment. However, her new role as a wife also demanded much of her time and attention. And with this change, Charlotte's focus shifted and she began to devote her energy to other literary projects, leaving Willie Ellin unfinished. In addition to these personal changes, Charlotte's emotional and physical health played a role in the novel's incomplete state. By the time she was working on Willie Ellin, Charlotte has experienced significant grief, including the death of her siblings, which have had a profound effect on her. The weight of this grief, combined with the strains of married life, may have affected her ability to maintain the emotional and the narrative drive needed to finish the novel. And of course, Charlotte's pregnancy in 1855 was another pivotal factor. Although her marriage had brought her happiness, the pregnancy soon became complicated and her health began to decline. Sadly, these complications ultimately led to her death in March 1855, only a few months after her marriage. This untimely death marked the abrupt end of her life and obviously her career, and leaving Willie Ellin and other works unfinished and hidden away. While we can only speculate about what Charlotte might have done with the story, the combination of personal change and emotional turmoil and the physical toll of pregnancy prevented her from completing Willie Ellin. The novel remains an unfinished fragment of her literary legacy, offering a glimpse into her evolving skills as a writer and the complex emotional landscape that she explored. It's gonna take me till Christmas if I can't get my words out. Charlotte's decision to reject Arthur's proposal was largely influenced. The first fragmented into. I'm going to have to stop because he's loitering, isn't he? My husband has decided to stand outside my door and wait for me to finish filming to ask me something. Do I ignore him? Or is it something important? I nearly got that. I was going well as well. I was in the flow of it. I was in the zone. Now I don't know where he's gone and what he's doing. Right. She was not ready to accept his proposal at that time. Sorry, pointing with my thing. That's a bit rude of me. Sorry, I will redo that. So I've stabbed myself multiple times playing with this hat pin, so I'm thinking it's probably not the best thing to play with, but it's really satisfying, isn't it? It's like when you have a pen in your hand, you can't just hold it. You have to mess about with it. But yeah, I've stabbed my leg about 4 times every time I move. And yeah, my fingers are feeling a bit sore too. So yeah, maybe I shouldn't use a hat pin. Not that I need a hat pin, having short hair, even though I do like a hat. Obviously, I've got no hair to hold it in place. But yeah, it's just a pretty thing I was given. So hence the hat pin. So that brings us to the end of our journey into this fascinating unfinished tale of Willie Ellin. And of course, the questions it's raised about Charlotte's writing process. And also, I need to send out a big thank you to Nicole Fryer for her invaluable help with this subject. So thank you very much. Also, Nicole has written several fictional books inspired by the Brontes, including one my daughter really enjoyed called The Tale of Two Glass Towns. If this sounds like your sort of thing and you want to check it out, I've put a link in the description below. Now, here comes the big question. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Arthur Bell Nicholls made it difficult for Charlotte to focus on her writing? Was her writing taking up too much of her attention, possibly affecting their marriage? And based on the fragments we have, do you think Willie Ellin would have been a great novel if Charlotte had finished it? Let me know your opinions in the comments below. I'm really interested to know. And also, I'm aware that there's very much Team Arthur and Team Not Arthur. So I know this is going to cause a bit of a conversation. So yeah, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching today. Like I say every week, if you like this video, please do the whole likey, subscribe-y thing. It really, really does help me out, and it lets YouTube know that we want to watch more Bronte content. Have a great weekend. I'm doing it again. Have a great weekend, and I will see you the Friday after next. I don't know what this means. For more Bronte adventures. Take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye.